And
Hello, I'm Judy Alvarado. I feel like his wife. How are you? It's nice to
Judy's
meet
the
you.
co-director of Straight A Academy. I'd like to thank everybody for coming today to Boys and Girls Club Straight A Academy. We are a small private school, non-traditional, non-institutional. It follows the old tutelage model. And we are very fortunate and blessed to have with us today presidential candidate, Congressman Dr. Ron Paul. If you please welcome Dr. Paul. Dr. Paul, I thought you could have you come on up here. I appreciate it. We have some of our students here that their assignment was to go onto your website and look at some of the issues and see if they might be able to formulate some questions that if you'd be so gracious to field some of those questions, we'd appreciate it.
I'd be glad to. Just so I know what we're doing, how many minutes are we going to be doing this? So I'm going to give short answers or long answers.
Well,
what is the length of time we're going to be here?
Like 15?
About 15 minutes,
Oh, okay.
and then we'll do a tour of the facility, and then I had a couple of things that
Oh, okay.
we
Okay,
get
good.
you on
So,
community access TV.
Okay, I'm open to questions, or
Would you like to have a seat, or
Okay, that'd be good.
just kind of an informal?
I could just open with a very, very short statement. That,
Oh, please.
I've been involved in, well, I'm a physician. I've been practicing medicine for many, many years, but I got into politics because I got an interest in economics. But really the philosophy of what I've been talking about for so many years is really
Felix
very
for Judy to the
basic.
desk, please. Felix for Judy.
Sorry.
Very basic. It's based on American traditions of individual liberty, emphasizing liberty, and with a precise definition. Liberty means you have a right to your life, a right to your liberty, and you have responsibilities from that, which means that government shouldn't be trying to make you a better person. That's up to you. The government's not to regulate the economy. It's up to people to spend their own money and make their own investment. Politicians and bureaucrats are very smart, to tell you the truth. And then also it involves a foreign policy, which is different than most people have heard. But our history, our traditions have been this way, as well as the Republican Party, and that is to have a strong national defense without telling the rest of the world how to live. So it's different than what you're inheriting and what you're getting. And unfortunately, I think you're inheriting less liberty and more debt and a foreign policy that's unsustainable. So that's a very brief description of what a freedom philosophy is all about, but I'd be delighted to answer any questions.
Now they're all going to be scared. Too many cameras.
If I don't talk, I'll talk about the Federal Reserve or something. Here we go.
All right. Lots of
Please
countries.
state your name if you would.
Mason Murphy, Bedford. Lots of countries like us. Lots of countries don't like us being in their own country. Do you feel that withdrawing our troops from all over the world, from countries such as Germany, who aren't even involved in conflict of any sort, do you think that'll benefit us or be bad for us?
Okay, so you're suggesting where we're involved and they don't like us, it makes more sense coming home, and the question is if we're in a country, let's say like Japan or Germany, we're not fighting with them anymore, but would there be an advantage? I says definitely, because that is sort of a gift to Japan. They spend less on their own defense, so we spend it, and you have to work hard and pay for this. And I think you need to put the past behind us, and we've had troops in Japan since World War II as well as in Germany. So it's a subsidy for them, and that actually helps them for their social programs. They spend more money on their social programs. We spend more money on our military that doesn't really serve our defense interests. At the same time, then there's less money left in our economy to take care of educational and medical needs here. Long term, though, there's usually a downside, even though being involved in war in Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan, there's immediate downside because they don't want us there and they'll kill us for being there. But there's a lot of downside for being, say, in Japan. There's a lot of resentment there, even though they get an economic benefit. There's resentment there because any country that we're in, we say that our military is exempt from their laws. So some of our military, just like in every society, sometimes they get into trouble and they break the law, and then we won't, we won't allow them to be tried in their courts. So there is a lot of resentment there. In Okinawa, they're arguing about where the base should be and how big it should be. Ultimately, it doesn't serve our interests, and I think it doesn't serve their interests. So I'd be for bringing the troops home because we don't have any money. We're really broke, and we don't have the authority. For the most part, it's a negative for us, so that's why I advocate bringing all our troops home.
My name is Daniel, and the Department of Education contributes significantly in the billions to the national public school budget. So if you eliminated the department, then how would you plan to replace that funding with many schools already cutting sports programs that they can't afford?
Well, the one thing is when you pump money into an area, it's done because it wants to help the students and make better education. But usually the result is higher prices. It costs to go to college. Well, how old are you? Is this high school?
High school.
High school.
And some college students.
And when you go to college, all of a sudden it costs about 20 or 30 times more than when I went to college. Because
Give us the duty to the main desk, please.
they put money into education. But where did they get the money? We ran out of people to tax, and we ran out of people to borrow without pushing interest rates up, so we print the money. So if you print the money and then you tell the government they have to spend it on education, it doesn't improve education, it pushes the prices up. The only city that our country, that Congress has responsibility for is Washington, D.C. And there's always problems. I mean, there's always more crime, more drugs, bad education, and it's a real mess. So they always say, well, we need more money. But they're up to about $17,000 or $18,000 per student. My guess is that these students aren't getting $18,000 a year subsidies to get them educated. So it isn't like if you put more money into it, you're going to get more benefits. So I don't think it's efficient. You don't lose the money by not spending it through the Department of Education. You allow that money to stay in the economy, and you don't spend money on the bureaucrats telling everybody what to do and micromanaging education because there's no net benefit to this. We have a situation now where we have been very much involved in education. We have people graduating from college now, and many of them have to show for is debt. The students have more debt than all the credit cards put together, $1 trillion. And the jobs aren't there because of all the mischief that's involved in us wrecking the economy. But even if you didn't look at it from the pros and cons of is it good or bad having the Department of Education, if you looked at it from a strict constitutional viewpoint, there's no proper authority for it. It was never meant for the federal government to be involved in micromanaging education. So that would be enough to make me stop. But if we as a country, or you as a generation, come along and thought, now this is a good idea, we want the government to start taking over education because, it'll clean up all the messes that the school districts have gotten us involved in, you should change the Constitution. But it's not there. But if you ignore the Constitution on those areas, then you can ignore it in other areas. And that's exactly where we are today. We ignore just about every place. So the president wants to go to war in Iraq, even though Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. They have no weapons. But so the Congress should react by saying, well, if you want to go to war, you have to have a declaration. No, they ignore it. So they ignore all the things. Monetary policy. We ignore the Constitution. It says that you can't print money. But we print money, and that's why debt goes up, and that's why you get financial bubbles. That's why we're in this financial mess. So respecting the rule of law is important, but also the more you study this, I think you'll come around to understanding the bureaucracy. They don't work very well, and it was one of the main reasons we had a revolution. They were sick and tired of the British bureaucracy and the military dictating how they treated the colonists at that time, and this is the direction we're going in. I think it's very bad for us. Here you go.
My name is David. In your opinion, in our current governmental system, with the three branches of government, is the balance of power truly working?
Do you say they don't seem to work?
Is there a real balance of power between the president and the legislative and the judicial branch?
It's not working very well now because you know, we've sort of neglected our responsibilities. We go to war. We allow the executive branch to act on their own. We allow the executive branch, the president to write executive orders. We allow the executive branch to write law. All the regulations are law. They shouldn't be allowed to do that. It should always be the Congress. We allow the Federal Reserve to exist, no authority. We allow the Federal Reserve to print money. So there is no balance. There is no competition anymore. The Congress more or less does things they shouldn't be doing, like the Department of Education, but they don't do the things they should be doing. And that is assuming the responsibility over monetary policy and foreign policy and going to war and all these things. So in many ways, people could make a mistake that the system is failing. The Constitution is failing us. But it isn't so much the Constitution, and they warned us, as the founders warned us, that the Constitution is only going to be good as the morality and the character of the people. So if the morality and the character of the people is demanding the welfare state and the warfare state and the police of the world, and you have the same kind of people in Congress and they're rewarded because that's what the people want, then the Constitution fails. So it isn't a failure so much that it was a bad Constitution. Actually, we fail as a people because we have drifted a long way from honoring the rule of law. Right now, this past week, a law was passed that said that the military can now arrest an American citizen who may be, associated with some group that might be an enemy. They might, if somebody goes to a mosque or visit a website and say, oh, they could be terrorists, even if you're an American citizen, they can say, well, you were talking to the wrong people. You could be dangerous. Now it says the Army can arrest him and put him in indefinite detention and denied a trial and denied an attorney. So that is the kind of thing that's happening because we don't respect the rule of law. And just about a year ago, the president announced that, yeah, there are some very bad people out there, and we don't have time to waste with charges and trials, that if necessary, we have the right to assassinate American citizens, and they've done it 3 times already. So that's a precedent that you will be inheriting. You say, oh no, that's just 3 people, that's not bad. But let me tell you, the precedent is set, and it is very bad. It was one of the reasons the revolution was fought, not to have the military in our homes and in our houses and run our lives. So we're moving toward a military state where the military determines the rule of law rather than the responsibility of us in the Congress and writing laws and assuming our responsibilities.
My name is Jonathan. So China's placed a large tariff on all of our goods that go over to China, and I was just wondering, as president, how would you address that?
Well, we don't have authority over China. You know, if China wants to punish their people, because a tariff is a tax. When you put a tax on, you're taxing the people. Some people would suggest, oh, those dirty Chinese, what we have to do is tax everything they make and double or triple the price of cheap goods that the consumer in this country are getting. So the solution to me is hardly putting a tax on poor people. And so I don't like trade wars, but these trade wars, which is coming, this is a consequence of the monetary system. Instead of everybody defining their currency as in the weight of a commodity, which would have these balance of trades, but when everybody has a different currency fluctuating and printing at different rates, and then they fix the rates of exchanges to get advantages, it leads to these trade wars. So you're seeing the introduction of a major trade war going on. And I fear that because the American people right now, I'm afraid the majority might say, well, we have to retaliate, we have to fight this trade war. And that seems to help for a week or 2 or 3, but it usually just raises prices and it hurts the people that you don't want to hurt. Free trade is a better system, but the ultimate solution for this would be to have sound currencies. We have this fluctuating currency because we have temporary benefits because we issue the reserve currency. Everybody wants dollars, so we've been taught to be very dependent on just printing money. So we print money. That's why we buy these goods overseas that are cheap. And so you have to address the monetary issue. But retaliating with trade barriers against them is a punishment to our people. So I'm not for that. You say, well, how can we compete? We can't keep up with the Chinese. They're selling these cheap goods. Then we change our ways here to make it more competitive, to invite capital back here. But because our currency is weak and we export our capital, we also tax capital coming back in. So if a businessman has a lot of money overseas, if he brings it back in, we charge him a lot of money. Then we overregulate them. Then we have artificially high costs of labor. You know, that pushes prices up. And just look at where the jobs were lost. It was in the Rust Belt, where people got to make $75 an hour. When you add up all the benefits, they say, hey, this is great. This is very beneficial. It's beneficial if you have a job. But the jobs disappear. They went south in where there was, like even in Texas today, we're getting some of those jobs, but a lot of those jobs go overseas. So you have to look at it with the monetary policy, the tax policy, the regulatory policy, in order to really solve the problem of China putting on these tariffs. But they're retaliating because we lecture them for having an artificially strong currency, or artificially weak currency, but we have an artificially weak currency too. That's what we do. That's what QE1 and QE2 is. Print a lot of money and weaken the currency, and that'll help our exports. So we've already done it. They're retaliating against us for messing around with our currency. So it's back and forth, and that's all a consequence of having paper money rather than a sound monetary system.
Are you suggesting that as in the gold standard?
Well, that's what the Constitution has given us. The Constitution says only gold and silver can be legal tender. More modern approach is allowing the market to determine it. My approach, because I can't see closing the Fed down in one day, I just want to introduce, permit the Constitution to work, legalize the Constitution, so if people wanted to get out of the paper money system, they could, but you'd have to change the law, the legal tender laws, and you wouldn't be allowed to tax silver dollars and gold dollars. So, but that's what the Constitution said, and it's never been repealed, and periodically they went off the gold standard and always went back, but this time we've been off it since 1971, totally off completely. And so we've had a worldwide financial bubble forming since 1971, and that's why this financial crisis is much, much bigger than anything before. But this has been done many times over history about violating the principles of a commodity money, and when it breaks down, they always have to go back to something where the people trust the currency. Today,
Give us security to the desk,
you
please.
just
Give
can't
us
say,
security
well,
to the
trust the
desk.
dollar going to be as good as gold. But if you were, if somebody's just got married and have kids and they want to save for college for 30 years, I mean, nobody's going to buy a 30-year government bond that's earning 2% and say in 30 years, they're going to be paying for the education because the cost of education going up. So nobody trusts the money. It's all a game they play where they manipulate it to the benefit of the wealthy at the expense of the middle class, because the wealthy, the bankers and all, can borrow that money at 0%, and they loan it back to the government, make 3%, and then the people don't have jobs, and what they get are the higher prices, and the higher prices are nothing more than a tax. The gold standard would prevent that.
Me?
Marina, I think this issue is something that our generation is really sort of ahead of your generation on, and I respect your commitment to the Constitution, and so I guess my question is, one of the things that the Constitution sort of unequivocally, stands for, its purpose is equality, unalienable rights of all citizens. So given that, I'm curious why you don't support a amendment to or a national, same-sex marriage. I feel like that is just like so inherent in our Constitution.
Well, do you understand my position on marriage?
Yeah, you said recently that you support it, but you don't support a constitutional.
No. I mean, why do we need a constitutional amendment to tell people what they can do? I just say you get the government out of everybody's life, and just get the government out of it. Why should the government tell you what marriage is all about? You might have one definition, he might have another definition, and I might have one where You know, I've been married for 54 years, and I think marriage is between a man and a woman. For me, it's a pretty good definition. I have no intention on defining that. I don't think the federal government should define it. First, they don't have the authority. If there are regulations, they have to be at the state level. But my position is that it's a private matter, and the government should not, especially amend the Constitution to define marriage. I mean, there's no need to do that. If you accept the idea that people have a right to do what they want, as long as they don't hurt other people, as long as they don't force their will on others in either direction. One person has this definition over here. Neither side has a right to force it on somebody else. So it's a complete voluntarism and no force. So it's if you have a constitutional amendment, you're going to be forcing people to accept whatever you say in the constitutional amendment. The constitutional amendments now are to, define it, as a man and woman. Others want to open up the door and use anything. So how are you going to resolve this fight? Who's going to get to define it? I don't want the fight. I don't want it to be put in the law. I want people to make up their own mind.
Well, marriage is a legal issue, right? So
It's what?
It's in this country, there are still people who are being denied access to marriage, and so isn't it the government's responsibility to protect
Well,
citizens'
no,
rights?
if there's a contract, the people get to define the contract. If they say they're married. So if and it should always done voluntarily. And if that's the case, you don't have to force people to accept your definition or his definition. You get to pick and choose. But if you have an agreement, the agreement has to be enforced by the government. If there is a voluntary secular type contract versus a marriage contract, that's an agreement. And there should be, you could go to the courts and resolve the differences and the arguments over it. But I don't think you have to force a definition on other people, one way or the other. I think it should be up to the individual.
Are there any more straight A students with questions?
I'll give you a quick question here. I'm Jay Gardner. Why do you feel a thorough audit of the Federal Reserve is necessary?
Why do I feel?
A thorough audit of the...
An audit?
Right.
Why do I feel the audit of the Federal Reserve be necessary? First, they shouldn't exist. Second, if they're going to exist, the responsibility of Congress is to produce, involve themselves in oversight. They should know what they're doing. During the bailout in 2008, the Congress spent about $1 trillion taking care of their friends and bailing out banks and corporations, which is absolutely unconstitutional. But they did it. The Federal Reserve was involved with $15 trillion, and they bailed out foreign banks and all kinds of people, and they're still doing it. And that is huge because that's a tax, because what they're doing is they get to spend money, not even on budget, no permission whatsoever, and they won't tell us anything. So we've worked hard on the budget, and we've gotten some information. That's why we know how much money they spent, but they didn't want to give us an ounce of information. I think if everybody if your generation would be really onto this and you find out everything the Fed has done, I believe you'd get rid of the Fed. But the Fed's going to just get rid of itself because it's non-functioning. I mean, they'll destroy the money and then there'll be a new monetary reform. The big question you'll probably have to answer is, are we going back to our Constitution and having sound money, or are you going to allow the IMF and the World Bank devise the next system, which would be more world government? I think that'd be very dangerous.
I have one last question I would like to pose, if I may.
Okay.
I watched the debates last Thursday, and one of my observations was that anytime you had anything to say on domestic policy, there were large ovations and you seemed to have a lot of support. The one area where people have tried to hurl insults at you and such has been foreign policy. How do you answer charges? And I know I saw there's a video on your website, and I thought that was informative and helpful. But how do you answer charges of people saying, oh, he's just isolationist, and it's naive to think that we can just, if we pull back our troops, everyone will then love us? To what level do you see the United States staying engaged with our friends and adversaries around the world? And I'm humbly suggesting that if you were able to articulate this a little more clearly, I think, and it's not an easy thing to do, I know, especially in sound bites and debates. But as it pertains to foreign policy, that's the one area that people have tried to bash you.
Well,
If you could have a chance to speak to that and perhaps clarify.
they want to
what degree
make
would
what
you
I'm
vote?
saying as a negative because they call it isolationism. That's supposed to be a negative, mean term that you don't want to talk to people around the world. Actually, my policy is exactly opposite. So unfortunately, the conventional knowledge of the media and everybody and other candidates is that we as a people are obligated to tell everybody how to live. And if they don't do it the way we do it, we bomb them and impose our dictator on them. And if they do it, we give them money. And that's what established. And if you don't go along with that, you're an isolationist. But the interesting thing is the people who call me an isolationist are the ones who always want to prevent you from trading with people. I mean, I'm the one that wants to trade with Cuba. Yeah, you know, the Cold War's over. Why don't we trade with Cuba? Because the founders were explicit. They said the more interrelations you have with countries, the better it is, the less chance you're going to fight with them. So I don't want to put on tariffs and sanctions, but they're the ones who are doing this. See, one of the few things Nixon did right was he at least started talking to the communist Chinese. You know, they were bad people. Nobody wants to talk to anybody today, even if they don't have anything that they're going to attack us with. But China had nuclear missiles, and we were fighting and killing each other. Nixon decided to talk to them. And now we trade with them. Yeah, we have these trade fights and going on, but at least we're not killing each other. So a lot has been achieved by willing to talk to people and trade with people. And I just think that if you care about national defense, you don't want to put armies on people. I think we're so less safe because of this. And the best way to think about this, about when you say, oh no, I like the idea, we got to go get those Pakistanis, the Syrians are bad people, we got to go in there, and those Iranians, they want to take over the world. Think about what would it be like if another country did it to us. See, I sort of want to follow a golden rule in foreign policy. Don't do anything to another country that you wouldn't be quite happy for another country to do to us. So I think we actually end up with a much weaker. Besides, we don't have any money anymore. All great nations finally collapsed for economic reasons. The best example, recent example, was the Soviet system. When I was drafted in 1960 over the Cuban crisis, they had 30,000 nuclear missiles and weapons, and we still didn't have to fight them because we contained them and we worked with them, we talked to them. Guess how we beat them? Because their economic policies were deeply flawed. They went and stupidly got into a no-win war in Afghanistan. So, and where are we right now? Doing the same thing, and we're on. The great threat now for you is a threat to your liberties at home and the threat of the financial calamity that's on our doorstep. And it does involve the foreign policy. That's why I see this in economic terms, in national security. The most important thing that gives me a strong defense of this in a political sense is the fact that the military are overwhelmingly in favor of what I'm talking about because they have to go over there and get shot at and killed and wounded. And our campaign gets twice as much money as all the other Republican candidates put together because they're sick and tired of these wars. So the people who don't want to give up on the military-industrial complex, they want to make it a negative and say, oh, this is isolationism and all these bad things. But it's American tradition, it's Republican tradition too. When you think the statement that you hear frequently about the military-industrial complex, that was Eisenhower said, beware. You'll be building weapons just for the sake of the military-industrial complex. You always have to have Hitler, another new Hitler. Get rid of him, get rid of him, get rid of him. Keep building these weapons and weapons. And the old right, Robert Taft, Mr. Republican, said we shouldn't even belong to NATO. And the founders gave strong advice. So I think I'm very much in the Republican tradition, very much in the American tradition, and very much on the side of emphasizing a strong national defense instead of pretending that we can be the policemen of the world and force our will on other people.
So to clarify, I hear you saying that you are very much for international engagement, just not militarily.
you do a much better job summarizing. No military engagement, that's right. But it's a lot different than isolationism. Not
Much different
much more
than
open.
what you've been accused of.
Much more open in the sense of trade and travel and exchange of ideas. That's what you really need.
Well, I want to thank all of you for coming and joining in our discussion with Congressman Paul. We need to steal him for about 5 minutes ourselves, so we'd like to, again, thank you for coming and coming to Boys and Girls Club and Straight A Academy, and have a good afternoon, or a good day.
Thank you.
So we've got 5 minutes with you. We're going to go to across the hall. Okay? You're on. Okay, so I'm just going to, you have your glasses ready. Hey, welcome to another edition of Straight A Walking. We are privileged to go Straight A Walking today with Congressman Paul. Welcome to Straight A Walking, Congressman Paul.
Yeah.
Thank you for agreeing to do this a little bit to help students learn how to take SAT questions. So we have a verbal question for the Congressman. We want to see how his vocabulary is. We're going to split the screen, and the kids at home are going to kind of race you to see if they can answer it before you. Are you ready, Congressman Paul? Are you ready to go? Okay, kids, it's the question is the president. I'll let the Congressman read it. Are you ready at home? Are you ready, Congressman Paul?
Right.
And the question is number 3. On your mark, get set, go.
The president is so dogmatic that he will never even consider another person's viewpoint to be valid if it is different from his own.
That was too easy. His vocabulary is strong enough. He just looked down and he knew immediately that a dogmatic person is one who will never listen to someone else. So we're going to throw another real quick question at the Congressman. That was, the kids at home didn't even have a chance. Wow. Okay. Well, that's all right. You guys take a look. And remember, at home, any vocabulary you don't know, you're writing it down, you're looking it up. Okay. Now we're going to throw a grammatical question to the Congressman. See if he can catch this one. It's number 21, Congressman Paul. Are you ready at home? Go.
Although we had expected poor services at the resort, we were more than satisfied at the attention we received throughout our stay. Probably should go better. Although we had expected poor services at the resort, we were more than satisfied with the attention we received throughout our stay. Something like that.
Yes, you're correct. It should be satisfied with. And the reason being, students, it's an idiom. And most of the idioms focus on prepositions like that. So again, Congressman Paul, thank you so much for going Straight A Walking.
We're going to get a picture with him quick.
All right, bye-bye.
All right.
Thank you for your answers. And
Thank
honestly,
you.
I'm not sure, a little bit heady of me to be suggesting, but I was like, if he can articulate that he's not isolationist and that he wants to engage other nations.
Big difference.
Just
Of course,
not
I
militarily, think that would be-
answer it quite frequently, but the other side would like them to, identify or
Right.
define it for me.
And then the soundbite when you're rushed off,
So
and I
nice to
understand.
meet you.
I
Such an honor. We're going to have
appreciate
you
it.
on community access television.
Oh, okay,
so.
good. So it's rather remarkable that they can turn me into the isolationist when I'm really the most opposite of that term.
Right. Just on different terms. Just
But
on-
the point you made is the important point. The military shouldn't define whether you're an isolationist or not.
Right,
But
exactly.
the tariffs and the barriers and the mercantilism, all this, that's what isolation is all about. Building walls around a country.
All right,
Thank you
well, let's
so
sort
much,
you out
sir. We
to-
appreciate it.